Step aside for secondary screening.
I'm a federal prosecutor.
Sure you are.
48 hours. That's all it took. 48 hours. For a security officer's entire career to completely collapse. 48 hours. And it all started on a Tuesday morning. At exactly 8:47 a.m. At the entrance of a federal courthouse. At the security checkpoint. Right in front of the metal detector. That morning, 247 people entered that building. 247 people walked through the metal detector. 247 people placed their bags on the X-ray conveyor belt. And only one was stopped. Only one was questioned. Only one was told, "You don't belong here." The difference? That person was black. But there was something the security officer didn't know. The man he stopped worked in that building every single day. On the 6th floor, he was a federal prosecutor. And not just any prosecutor, he prosecuted police misconduct cases. The body camera was recording. Every second, every word, every mistake. And 48 hours later, that security officer would be unemployed. Let me show you how this story began. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this need to be told, and your subscription helps us keep exposing the truth. Michael Torres was 38 years old, Harvard Law School graduate, federal prosecutor specializing in civil rights violations. He had put corrupt cops behind bars. He had dismantled discriminatory police practices. He prosecuted the very misconduct he was about to experience. That Tuesday morning, Michael arrived at the Richard J. Morrison Federal Courthouse at 8:42 a.m., just like he had for 3 years. Parked in his assigned space. Took the elevator to the lobby. His routine was identical to the previous 743 workdays. The security checkpoint was busy with lawyers, defendants, witnesses, and court staff. Michael had passed through this checkpoint thousands of times. He knew every officer by name. They knew him. Except Carlos Mendez was working the checkpoint that morning. Carlos was new, just 6 weeks on the job, and he was about to make a career-ending mistake. Michael joined the security line at 8:47 a.m. He checked emails on his phone while waiting. The line moved quickly. At 8:52 a.m., his turn came. He placed his briefcase on the X-ray belt, removed his phone, keys, and wallet. Walked through the metal detector. No alarm. Clean. Janet, the X-ray operator who'd worked there 12 years, glanced at the screen. Legal files. Laptop. Nothing unusual. Michael walked to collect his briefcase. Carlos Mendez stepped in front of him. "Sir, I need you to step aside." Michael looked up. "Is there a problem with my bag?" "Step aside, sir. Secondary screening." Here's the thing. Secondary screening requires justified cause, X-ray alert, metal detector alarm, reasonable suspicion. None of those conditions existed. But Carlos had decided Michael needed screening anyway. Do you think this would have happened if Michael was white? Drop your answer in the comments. Michael remained calm. "Can you tell me what triggered the secondary screening?" "Random selection," Carlos said. It wasn't random. In 47 minutes, Carlos had conducted 4 secondary screenings. All 4 were black or Hispanic. He'd allowed 183 white individuals through without issue. Janet had noticed this pattern. She'd reported it to her supervisor 3 weeks ago. Nothing was done. Carlos approached with a handheld detector. "I'm going to search your briefcase manually." "The X-ray already scanned it," Michael said calmly. "What specifically are you looking for?" "Sir, I need you to cooperate." "I am cooperating. I'm asking what justification you have." Carlos's jaw tightened. "Who are you?" Odd question. Not, "What's your business?" Just, "Who are you?" Michael reached for his briefcase. "My identification is in—" "Don't touch the bag!" Carlos snapped, his hand moving toward his belt. That movement hand toward the weapon would become key evidence. It was escalation, an implied threat, completely inappropriate. Michael froze. He recognized that gesture from dozens of cases he'd prosecuted. "I'm reaching for my federal ID," he said clearly. "I work in this building. I'm a federal prosecutor." Carlos actually laughed. Dismissive. "Sure you are. My name is Michael Torres, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Civil Rights Division, Office 612, 6th floor. Verify it with the security desk." "Empty your pockets," Carlos ordered, ignoring everything. Michael complied slowly. Phone, wallet, keys on the inspection table. His federal badge was visible on his belt clip. Carlos either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. Other people were filming now. Janet had already pressed the button summoning the supervisor. Michael extracted his federal prosecutor ID from his wallet. Official Department of Justice credential, photo, badge number, federal seal. He held it out. Carlos took it, looked at it, looked at Michael, looked back. His expression changed. Color drained. Hands trembled. He just harassed a federal prosecutor in the prosecutor's own courthouse, on camera. Security Supervisor Daniel Reeves arrived, 20-year veteran. He assessed the scene instantly and knew something had gone catastrophically wrong. "What's happening here?" Daniel asked. Before Carlos could answer, Michael spoke. "I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Torres. I was stopped for secondary screening despite passing through the metal detector without incident and my bag showing nothing unusual on X-ray. When I identified myself and requested justification for the search, Officer," Michael glanced at Carlos's name tag, "Officer Mendez appeared to escalate rather than de-escalate the situation." Daniel recognized Michael immediately. They'd spoken hundreds of times over the years. "Mr. Torres, I apologize for this confusion. You're free to proceed." "I appreciate that, Daniel," Michael said, his tone professional but firm. "However, I need Officer Mendez's full name and badge number. I also need confirmation that body camera footage exists for this interaction." Daniel's face went pale. He understood exactly what was coming. "This is being blown out of proportion," Carlos started to say. Michael cut him off. "Officer Mendez, in the past 6 minutes, you have conducted an unjustified secondary search, ignored my identification as a federal prosecutor, placed your hand near your weapon in an implied threat gesture, and laughed dismissively when I identified my position. All of this is captured on camera. This is not blown out of proportion. This is documented civil rights violation." The lobby had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. It was 8:58 a.m. The encounter had lasted 6 minutes. By 9:15 a.m., Michael was in his office on the 6th floor. He didn't go to his scheduled 10 a.m. hearing. Instead, he drafted a formal complaint, 3 pages, single-spaced, time-stamped, detailing every moment of the interaction. He also did something else. He pulled the security checkpoint data for the past 6 weeks, the period Carlos had been employed. As a federal prosecutor, he had access to this information, and what he found confirmed his suspicions. Carlos Mendez had conducted 47 secondary screenings in 6 weeks. 44 of them involved Black or Hispanic individuals. Only 3 involved white individuals. The disparity was statistically impossible to explain as random chance. Michael filed his complaint with 3 entities simultaneously: the Courthouse Security Administration, the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility, and the FBI Civil Rights Division. By 11:30 a.m., FBI Special Agent Rebecca Chen was reviewing the complaint. She immediately recognized the significance. A federal prosecutor alleging racial profiling by courthouse security, with body cam evidence, with statistical data showing a pattern of discrimination. This wasn't just serious. This was explosive. By 2 p.m., Agent Chen had obtained the body cam footage from the courthouse security system. She watched it 3 times. Each time, her jaw clenched tighter. The footage was damning. It showed exactly what Michael had described. No justified reason for the stop, Escalation instead of de-escalation, the hand movement toward the weapon, the dismissive laugh, everything. But Agent Chen also pulled footage from the previous 6 weeks. She watched Carlos conduct checkpoint screenings. The pattern was undeniable. White professionals walked through with minimal interaction. Black professionals were stopped, questioned, subjected to additional searches. By 4:30 p.m. Tuesday, Agent Chen had drafted her preliminary report. She recommended immediate investigation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and Title VII Employment Discrimination Statutes. By 6 p.m., the U.S. attorney for the district had been briefed. She was furious. One of her prosecutors had been profiled in his own courthouse. The optics were catastrophic. The legal implications were severe. By 8 p.m. Tuesday evening, 11 hours after the incident, Carlos Mendez had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Wednesday morning, 8 a.m. The investigation expanded. FBI agents interviewed Janet, the X-ray operator. She provided a statement describing the pattern she had observed. She also revealed that she had reported her concerns to the security supervisor 3 weeks earlier, and nothing had been done. The supervisor was now also under investigation for failing to address obvious discriminatory conduct. By Wednesday afternoon, agents had interviewed 17 people who had witnessed secondary screenings conducted by Carlos over the previous weeks. 12 of them described interactions that seemed racially motivated. Several had their own cell phone footage. Wednesday, 5 p.m. The courthouse security director was called into an emergency meeting with the U.S. Attorney, the FBI, and Department of Justice officials. He was informed that his employee had likely violated federal civil rights laws while on duty in a federal building against a federal prosecutor. The security director tried to defend Carlos, claiming he was just following protocol. Then they showed him the statistical analysis. 94% of Carlos's secondary screenings targeted minorities. There was no protocol that justified that disparity. Thursday morning, 9 a.m. Carlos Mendez was summoned to a termination hearing. His union representative attended. They watched the body cam footage together. The union rep shook his head. "I can't defend this." By Thursday, 10:30 a.m., exactly 48 hours and 43 minutes after the initial incident, Carlos Mendez was formally terminated from his position. But the consequences were just beginning. The FBI investigation expanded beyond Carlos. They examined the entire courthouse security operation and found institutional negligence. Carlos wasn't the only officer showing discriminatory patterns. 2 others demonstrated similar disparities. The security director had received multiple complaints over 18 months, but took no action. The Department of Justice initiated a formal civil rights investigation. The security company's $8.4 million federal contract was at risk. Michael didn't sue for personal damages. His point was made, but he pushed for systemic reform. Within 30 days, new protocols were implemented. All secondary screenings required documented justification, monthly statistical audits of patterns, mandatory quarterly bias training, civilian oversight of operations, body cameras mandatory for all personnel. Carlos tried finding work elsewhere, but news articles came up in every search. Security guard profiles federal prosecutor had gone viral. He was blacklisted from security work. Eventually took a warehouse job at a fraction of his former salary. The security director was demoted and transferred. The company settled with DOJ to avoid losing their contract. Amount undisclosed, but estimated high 6 figures. The biggest outcome? Precedent. Federal prosecutors nationwide reviewed courthouse security. Similar patterns emerged in 11 districts. Investigations launched. Reforms implemented. 3 weeks after the incident, Michael gave one interview to a legal affairs journalist. His words were measured, thoughtful, and powerful. "I had the knowledge, resources, and position to fight back," he said. "I knew my rights. I knew the law. I knew how to document what happened and who to report it to." But what about everyone else? What about the black defendants who get stopped and searched more thoroughly than white defendants? What about the Hispanic lawyers who face extra scrutiny that their white colleagues never experience? What about all the people who don't have my advantages, who suffer this treatment and have no recourse? He continued, "This incident happened to me on camera in a federal building, with multiple witnesses. And even with all that evidence, with my position and credentials, it still took 48 hours to get justice. How long does it take for people without those advantages? How many never get justice at all?" The interview was viewed 2.3 million times. Let's talk about what the body cam actually captured, because this is crucial. The camera doesn't lie. It doesn't have bias. It doesn't forget details. The footage shows Michael approaching the checkpoint at 8:47 and 23 seconds. A.M. He's professional, calm, wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase that clearly marks him as an attorney or court professional. At 8:52 and 17 seconds a.m., he walks through the metal detector. No alarm. At 8:52 and 31 seconds a.m., Carlos steps in front of him and says, "Sir, I need you to step aside." At 8:52 and 45 seconds a.m., Michael asks, "Is there a problem with my bag?" At 8:52 and 51 seconds a.m., Carlos says, "Step aside, sir. Secondary screening." At 8:53 and 12 seconds a.m., Michael asks, "Can you tell me what triggered the secondary screening?" At 8:53 and 18 seconds a.m., Carlos responds, "Random selection." But here's where the footage becomes really damning. The timestamp shows that in the previous 15 minutes, 11 people had passed through that same checkpoint without secondary screening. All 11 were white. At 8:54 and 3 seconds a.m., Carlos asks, "Who are you?" At 8:54 and 31 seconds a.m., Michael says, "I'm reaching for my federal ID. I work in this building. I'm a federal prosecutor." At 8:54 and 37 seconds a.m., Carlos laughs. The audio clearly captures it. At 8:54 and 39 seconds a.m., Carlos says, "Sure you are." That response alone was enough to establish discriminatory intent. A federal prosecutor identifies himself, and the response is mocking disbelief. At 8:56 and 12 seconds a.m., Michael produces his credentials. At 8:56 and 18 seconds a.m., you can see Carlos's expression change on camera. The realization hits him. At 8:56 and 45 seconds a.m., the supervisor arrives. At 8:58 and 2 seconds a.m., Michael requests badge information and confirms camera recording. 6 minutes. All recorded. All evidence. If you believe body cameras are essential for accountability, type yes in the comments. This story matters because it shows how quickly accountability can happen when factors align. Clear evidence, statistical proof, credible victim with system knowledge, multiple witnesses, and institutional will to act. But it also shows how rare that alignment is. Michael had every advantage, and it still took 48 hours. Imagine how long it takes for regular citizens without legal training, institutional access, or knowledge of which forms to file. 2 years later, the courthouse checkpoint looks different. Posted signs explain screening criteria. A civilian monitor reviews footage weekly. Quarterly statistics are published publicly. Carlos never worked security again. He's in a warehouse now. Never gave an interview. Michael continues as a federal prosecutor. Still walks through that checkpoint. Different officers work there now. They know exactly who he is. The company keeps the contract, but operates under a consent decree for 5 more years. The body cam footage, used in training programs nationwide. Law enforcement academies show it as an example of implicit bias in action. How 48 hours can change everything. There's something powerful about the number 48. 48 hours to go from employed to unemployed. 48 hours to go from anonymous security guard to cautionary tale. 48 hours for evidence to be gathered, reviewed, and acted upon. But here's what the number doesn't capture: the years of bias that led to that moment. The hundreds of other people Carlos had profiled before he stopped the wrong person. The system that failed to catch the pattern until a federal prosecutor experienced it firsthand. Justice came quickly for Michael Torres because he had the tools to demand it. But justice delayed is justice denied for everyone else who doesn't have those tools. This story isn't just about one prosecutor and one security guard. It's about a system that only responds when the victim has power. It's about how cameras and evidence and statistical analysis can prove what black and brown people have been saying forever. This happens, it's real, and it's wrong. 48 hours changed one man's career. But the patterns that led to those 48 hours, those have been running for decades. And they'll keep running until we decide that accountability shouldn't require a federal prosecutor to get profiled before we take it seriously. The body camera doesn't lie. The statistics don't lie. The pattern is clear. The only question is, how many more incidents have to happen before 48 hours of accountability becomes the standard, not the exception? Asterisk. Asterisk. If this story opened your eyes to something important, hit that like button and subscribe. These stories need to be told. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. Asterisk. Asterisk.